have to say that I'm a little bit nervous because I'm sitting next to a huge CEO, and I'm just a little professor here at Stanford University. And the other
I should be nervous. I mean, this is like some pretty amazing talent in the room here, and so I'm really glad to be here and see so many women interested in data science. So it's an honor for us to come and speak and meet all of you here for a short time.
Certainly. I was telling Susan, I almost never do external events, so I am crazy nervous right now.
Yeah, well, the other thing that came to my mind when I was thinking about, we got Susan from YouTube, is that I have to admit, I have a bit of a love-hate relationship with YouTube. I love it. You know, I'm a big cycling fanatic, and I rely on YouTube's recommendation system to keep me abreast. But I've been on YouTube with videos myself, and I really dislike those, especially the comments that people make. But Susan, I want to start with you because not too long ago, a woman in the conference, Anna, asked a question about the humanities and the importance of the humanities in work. And so this is for Anna. Because when I look at your bio, you started as a humanities major.
Yeah.
And then you studied history and literature. And then you went to economics and business. And now you found yourself a CEO of YouTube. So of course, the first question one asks is, how did that happen?
Yeah, well, I think it's really good to have a diverse background, and it's good to explore new and different areas. And I had been history and literature as an undergraduate. I only took my first computer science class when I was a senior in college. And it happened because I used to do temp work during my vacations, and I was assigned once to a startup, and I realized they were doing really interesting work, and I wanted to learn more, and I took a computer science class. I took CS50, which was the intro for a computer science major, and I loved it. And it was interesting because at the time I thought, like, it's too late for me. You know, I was only 21, right? And I thought, like, it's too late to be computer science. Like, my career's over. And so I do think it is really important for people to remember that you can make changes and learn and adjust your career over time. And it just appealed to me, the creative, the dynamic, fast-moving, many components of it. And then when I actually grew up here in the Bay Area. My dad was a professor at Stanford. So when I came back, I got a job at a startup. And I've been in tech now for almost 35 years.
So did you feel like a bit of an imposter when you first went into tech?
I was just surprised that I liked it, because the impression of tech was that it was this very, I had seen it's a not very interesting field, but what appealed to me was the ability to create. And I loved the fact that I could make something and it could be used by people all over the world, and that you could use tools and it could create something super meaningful. And so I immediately got that creative aspect of it. And I think, having a diverse background is really good. We deal with hard issues as a CEO. You deal with things that are technical, but also things that are ethical and people, and understanding a lot of background and having a full context has been really helpful for me. So I do think having diverse backgrounds in what you study can be really helpful to understand any kind of issue from many different dimensions and backgrounds.
I was going to ask you what skills that you gained during your studies in a non-tech field really helped you as CEO, but you already answered that now. Diane, you're a fellow at Google, and you've been there for a long time. Now, it may not be very obvious to the audience what it means to be a Google Fellow. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about that. And the other thing I'm really curious about, you've been at Google at the forefront of technology for quite some time. During this whole incredible new hype around data science, and you've seen it become so very large, not just at the company, but also in the world. So tell us about that as well, if you can.
Sure thing. So a fellow at Google is effectively the highest level of individual contributor at Google. So it's equivalent to like a VP level, but it basically means that you get to tackle, quite frankly, whatever interesting problems really need a level of depth, but also across Google, cross-functional expertise. So I tend to focus more on analytics. I'll be honest with you, I use analytics and data science as my wedge in to go and talk about all sorts of strategic issues at Google. So I tend to stick my nose in, usually in a helpful way, into various different areas all throughout Google. So, that's sort of a fellow job. It's effectively an individual contributor, really one about influence without authority, but really bringing a technical expertise and a technical depth. So that's sort of the job. It's crazy fun.
And when you first asked me to come, I was really glad to come because this is such an important group. But I was like, the person who really knows the most about data science is Diane. So I have to bring her. She answers basically all the hard questions that Google wants to know about. And so if there's something we haven't figured out or we want to have a lot more analysis on something, we go to Diane, and she provides a lot of insights for us.
Sometimes.
Well, there's sometimes not. I know you're going to ask about it, but sometimes not the insights we expected we would learn about.
That is
the
certainly
answer
true.
isn't what we expected, but she always gives us a very truthful answer.
That's good. So how has the role of data science changed in your job, Diane, and at the company over time?
I think it's been fascinating because when I certainly started at Google, there was no such thing as data science. I might tell the story just in terms of how we've changed the name of the job over time. It originally started as a decision support analyst, because really the goal was to provide data to support decisions. Then we sort of broadened it to sort of think about quantitative analysis. And so it was called the quantitative analysis job for a long time. And then people were like, there's this thing called data science, and like maybe you should rename it. And I kept going, wow. Anyway, but we finally caved and renamed our internal job descriptions to be data science. So what I would say is that, there's just a little bit of a story just in and of itself with regard to the names, but we've really sort of always viewed data science as making sense of what we're seeing through data, right? And there's a question about what questions you can and can't answer, and it's really about how do you actually give that insight and give the insights to really be able to say, okay, what should the decision be? I think the other key piece of it is it's all about uncertainty, right? The key thing is that with the data, it's reasoning under uncertainty. So you have to be able to say, okay, I can give you this level of information and this level of uncertainty. The rest is up to you, right? And now it's your judgment time because I can't do anything else. This is the level of uncertainty that I can mitigate. And so that's sort of been an interesting thing, and just really working with leadership to basically say, here's what we can do, here's the limits, what do you want to do? And really to help frame the discussion, frame the decision in that way.
So you talked about how the idea behind the work that you've been doing has changed from, data-driven decision-making support to now data scientists. What are we going to call data scientists 5 years from now? Uncertainty quantifiers?
Who knows? But I think that is a large part of what the job is. It's reasoning under uncertainty, and there are different types of uncertainty. Right? And so there's the representational uncertainty. How should I represent the work, the actual world, through to what we sort of think about much more, which is statistical uncertainty. But it's really about the different types of uncertainty that we have to work with.
Now, data science and data science algorithms, of course, are a really, really big part of YouTube as well. And one of the prime examples of it is the recommender system that you have, which I use almost every day, right? And sometimes I like it and sometimes I don't, but I won't. I love it. Yeah,
we'll have to talk afterwards about what you don't like about it.
Yeah. But I know you really like working on these recommender systems. And so I would love to hear how that has evolved over time, how you build those. And recently you did a total revamp. And so I'd love to hear about that too, and what kind of benefits that has given you and the company.
Sure. Well, recommendations are really essential to YouTube because of the volume that we operate at. So we have billions of people who come to YouTube every single day, and we have over 500 hours that are uploaded every minute to YouTube. So as a result, we need to figure out how do you match this large volume of users with content, and how do I know that you're interested in cycling, for example, right? And we'll have to talk afterwards about what you're not interested in. But ideally...
Botox, I'm not in.
So we look at those signals. We look at the users. What is the history in terms of what they've watched? What have they said they like? What have they said they dislike? And then we also survey the users to understand their feelings about some of those videos in terms of what was really positive or what was really negative. And then we include that into our learning system to better predict what is it to actually show to a user. Now, our systems generally evolved in terms of trying to, using new machine learning and new approaches to do that in a better, more efficient way. I believe we use over 80 billion signals or some very large amount of data to better understand what are the right sets of content to recommend to you. But over the years, it got increasingly complex. And we had to, as YouTube moved more from entertainment to information, we had to make changes in terms of how our systems worked. So when you think about entertainment, it's OK if there's a song that came out yesterday and now in the first 24 hours, and we have some new hits that come out will have millions, 100 million views, for example, in 24 hours. And that's OK for entertainment, but when you deal with something like news or medical information, you don't want it to be from a new source that suddenly has this huge amount of views. You want to go back to trusted sources that you know are going to rely important information. So our systems had to diverge a little bit and to be able to understand, hey, here's a new movie trailer. It's OK if there are millions and millions of views, but if you're talking about the war in Ukraine, you want to make sure that you're bringing up sources that are trusted so that you're not conveying any kind of misinformation. And then, of course, we also have wanted to look at ML fairness to make sure that we have an understanding, too, to make sure that our systems have learned, or what they've learned has enabled us to be representative in terms of what we're recommending as well. So we have our overall system, but then we have these different layers in terms of how to make sure that our systems are responsible in terms of the recommendations that we deliver. So. We could talk about this for a long time, but...
yeah, well, let's talk about it just a little bit more.
Sure.
Because I would love to hear where you think the biggest change still needs to happen in the recommender system. What is the biggest challenge that you're going to ask Diane to solve for you?
Yeah, we should ask Diane. But I mean, first of all, I will say our machine learning and our techniques have gotten a lot better over time. So that has been really positive, and I expect that to continue to get more and more sophisticated in terms of understanding what are the right content for us to use. And recommend to you. And similar for our advertising, we use similar types of algorithms. But there are still lots of areas where I'd say there's more work for us to do. One of the areas that we're very challenged with is understanding what are areas that you're interested in that we don't yet know about. So that actually, I'm sure there are many areas, but we just don't know about it. And that's actually problematic because in order for us to find out what you're interested in, we actually have to show a lot of impressions of things probably you don't want to see. So actually, as we're moving to more short-form content, in many ways, that actually gives us a new way to explore and try to understand. So we talk about exploration. How do we explore even more effectively? And there certainly are other areas where I think it'll be really hard for machines to really be 100%. So when we deal with really sensitive issues, like you could say hate or harassment or other areas like that, we can't just use machines to be able to determine that. We have to use humans in a lot of those cases to be able to understand the context that's associated with what's been said, how it's been said. But certainly over time, I expect our classifiers to get better and better to help us do more and more with machines effectively.
One of the reasons why it's so nice to have you both here today is that you're the person with the wishes and desires and the demands, and you're the person providing the solution. So Diane, I want to ask you, because this is something that is so common in the field of data science, how do you translate what the decision makers and executives want to something that is workable in technology?
It's actually, I think, where 90% of the work is, actually. And so the way I sort of think about it is, it's like, what do you actually want to do? It's like, I'll come, and you'll be like, OK, I need this. And I'm like, why? Tell me why. What are you going to do with it? right? Because I think it's very important to understand that why, because the answer may not lie in what you asked for, right? And so a large, it's like, I have interesting stories. Like, there was this time that a bunch of folks, in this case, I'll use, like it was like the head of search, the head of ads, and the head of engineering. So Alan, Amit, and Sridhar. And they came to me like, we have all these questions. And I'm like, great, I love questions. Tell me your questions. And I'm listening to their questions, and I'm listening to their questions. And I'm like, you don't really have questions that I can work with directly analytically. And so much of the work was actually in saying, okay, here's where we are from a business perspective. And really what you're trying to understand is you're trying to understand things about how the users are going to be using devices and, understanding, things about what, is going to be, interesting from like a commercial perspective or things along those lines. And so much of our work was actually in saying, here are the business questions. Here's what's actually answerable analytically. Now let's sort of see where the matches are, because then part of my job is to go, okay, I see that you have this business question. I got nothing for you. You're going to have to find some other way of doing it. And then there are other times where I'm like, okay, here's what I got. And I'll give another example. I was asked a lot about how to come up with long-term value for users. I'm okay, what do you want? And I was like, I want the, like the absolute value of the long-term value of users. I'm like, okay, why? And I keep asking and I keep asking. And what it comes down to is like, actually, what's much more useful? I'm like, I don't think you want that. What you really want, you want the relative change in value. That's going to be much more useful for what you're sort of doing. So, it's a lot of that interpretation, and it really requires understanding the domain expertise. And that's one of the fun things about data science is like the amount that you have to really understand the domain in order to be effective. But I guess I'll turn it over to you, Susan. How do you feel when I come back and I say, ha, it's on you. I got nothing for you.
Well, I don't think you actually come back that often and say you've got nothing.
That's true. I try to avoid that.
I think, a lot of times it will start where I'll ask a question, or, my equivalent, someone will ask a question, and you will refine our question. Like, oh, I think you really meant this, right? Is that really what you meant? Or could you explain, was it this or this, right? So you give us a lot more clarity and maybe how that question could get answered. And then I'm like, oh yeah, that's exactly what I meant, even though it wasn't really what I meant. You help me understand and get there. And then, like you said, there will be a lot of answers, and there are some set of things that data science can answer, and those answers can be unexpected. And then, like when they're unexpected, we need to figure out, like, well, how do you explain them? This isn't what I thought I was going to get. Well, why is that? And in some ways, those are the most valuable moments, because that's actually when you're learning, and that's when the data is telling you something that you didn't expect or you didn't know. So you have to, I think you really have to pay attention and be willing to learn. And then there'll be times where you'll say, I don't, the data can't tease out what that actual answer is. And that's, I'd say, where more the business expertise and judgment needs to come in, saying, based on what we know, we're going to have to deal with the uncertainty and make our best decision. Or we'll have to go back and ask a different set of questions to be able to figure out how do we get closer. So I think there's a lot of back and forth between how the business makes decision and our data science and analytics. And it is really important just to let the data lead. It is important to also interpret what does that mean. We spend a lot of time, I would say, across Google, like getting results and then asking, like, what did we mean, and was this right, and what if you had included this, and what if you had looked at the question a different way, would it have been the same result? Let's go back, let's redo it. And I do think that is really healthy to get to what is ultimately the best set of knowledge about a specific set of issues. So.
And it's okay, apparently, to just say, I don't have a solution for that, because you haven't been fired yet, Diane.
I have not been fired yet.
No, so that's good. And it brings me to this next question, because you mentioned failing and not knowing. And here I'm sitting totally in awe of two people who have reached the pinnacle of their career. And by all definitions that we may use, are very, very successful. So I'd like to talk about failure and ask you how you've dealt with that over your career. This is a theme that has come up several times today. And for me, my own career has been one mistake after another In fact, I always think that the definition of an expert is someone who's made every possible mistake. So tell me about how you approach failing, quote unquote, setbacks, not knowing, and how you've dealt with that throughout your career.
So failure is going to happen for anyone and everyone throughout your career. There's no way to always get everything right and to make all the right decisions. And I've always just approached it, which has been hard, but over time I've really tried to approach it by stepping back and being as unemotional from it as I can, just trying to understand it and accept it. Because what I've learned is that like our natural tendencies are to deny that failure. I mean, there are many things we can do. One is we can be like, no, I didn't fail. So in business, it's very easy for you to build a product, the product's not successful, and be like, oh no, it's gonna be successful. It's gonna be successful. If we just do this, it will get better. And not actually just acknowledge that there's probably something wrong, or we probably missed something, or there's a mistake. And so I think it's really important to just have a step back, not be personal about it, and to figure out, like, well, what should we do? Should we fix it? Should we cancel it? Should we move on? And that's a really hard thing to do, and it's really hard to accept the failure. But I've learned over time that if you don't, it just gets worse and worse and worse. You sort of dig yourself deeper and deeper into the hole, and it's better to just get out of the hole as quickly as you possibly can and move on. And it's sometimes those failures that give you insights into whatever you do next that will actually help you be super successful or achieve the success you didn't have in the first project, but to achieve it in the second project or when you do it in the future, in your future endeavors. So that's sort of how I approach it. And there've been many, I'm here as CEO of YouTube, but I used to work on Google Video, which was a competitor to YouTube. And at one point, we had to make a decision. Do we just continue with Google Video, or do we buy YouTube and sort of throw in the towel? And that was a really hard decision, but it was clear to me that was the right long-term decision for us to make. And a lot of people were really upset. A lot of people quit. A lot of people left. A lot of people didn't like that decision. But it was clear it was the right one. And so, but I also just encourage people not to give up. I think there are times that people are really upset about something. I know I've been in there where you're really angry with whatever happened, and you're like, I'm so angry, I'm just gonna quit, like serve them right? I'll quit and leave and do my own thing, and like they'll suffer. And like, but it never works that way. Like if you quit, like they won and you lost. So you need to stay in there. And I've been at Google now for over 20 years. So, it's good. Like you stay there, and over time you work it out, you figure it out, it's good to just stick with it and keep arguing for what you believe in and what's important to you and what you think will make a difference for your users and customers and your product or whatever your mission is. So,
what about you, Diane?
It's interesting. I was going to echo a couple of things. I mean, I think the first piece of advice that I have, especially when I get really upset about certain failures, is the first thing is sleep on it. It's always better the next day. It's like a lot of these things. It's better with perspective, is what I would say. So that's just one thing. The other thing is, practically speaking, one of the things I found the most useful to do, and we do this actually within engineering all the time. It's got a horribly morbid name, which is a post-mortem. Right? And the question is, why? Why did it fail? What happened? What did we learn from it? And I think, that question of why is the really critical one. And I think the key thing is why did it happen? You get an answer, okay, but why did that happen? And you have to just keep going and keep iterating so that you can really learn from what happened, right? Because that's the only way to really get better and to really do it better the next time. And so, the thing I sort of say is learn from the failure. Otherwise, it's a waste. Right? If you're going to try the thing, take the risk. When you fail, learn from it so that when you take the next risk, you don't make the same mistake. There was someone that I used to work for. His name is Jeff Huber. And, you'd come and you'd be like, okay, you made a mistake and so on and so forth. And it's like, okay, Did we get, did the learnings that we learned from that mistake, was it worth it? Are we not gonna make that mistake again? And it's until you can actually say yes to that question, like, yes, we've learned all that we can learn so that we don't do it again, that's when you've learned from that failure.
Love it. So it's amazing how fast time flies when you're talking to two people like this. But we have a few more minutes. And before we close, I just wanted to ask you, we have all these people in the audience, a lot of whom are just starting their career, a lot of whom are still starting their studies or are studying. You just talked about failure and how you deal with that. There's great pieces of advice. What else would you like to leave the audience with? What other pieces of advice do you have? So they can be the next CEO of YouTube, right? 20 years from now, some of you, maybe?
I would just encourage all of you to be curious and to think about the future and think about what's really meaningful to you. And when I actually joined Google, I joined Google as a company. I was officially employee 16, but about 4 people joined the day before. So I was very early in my joining Google. And I just joined it because at the end of the day, I thought it was going to be they had no revenue at the time. I just thought, this is going to be an interesting place because it's delivering value to people, it's delivering information to users. I could see people writing to us. We used to have an email queue that we'd all get when users wrote to support at Google. Everyone was on it. People would write about how it had made a difference for them. And so I just encourage you to be very open about looking for what is meaningful for you and how can you make a difference, and being curious about the world and believing that it will change and it will be different. So things that are growing fast will be very different 5 years from now. So I think if you find something that's meaningful, you feel like you're doing a good job, you feel like you can make a difference and grow, and it's something you love doing and you love the people that are there, then that will take you far.
Diane, you have a minute to add something.
So what I tend to say more than anything is to stay flexible. Everyone likes to ask us well, how did you plan your career? How did you get here? And I'm like, honestly, I never made any plans. And don't get me wrong, I think I was very lucky in many different ways, but there is a level of being open to opportunity, being open to possibility, staying flexible, dealing with whatever changes are happening around you that you may not have control over. And it's not a matter of actually having the control over those changes, but it's about how you actually react to them. And what do you do with that? And how do you sort of start owning your path and what choices you make? And so, dealing with ambiguity, dealing with flexibility, and basically adapting to the situation. It's you may have a planned path, may or may not happen that way. So the question is, how do you sort of manage, whatever's going to come? There's a, famous question, all new Google, it's what's the one thing you want me to learn? When I'm new to Google, what do you want me to, what should I, learn? I'm learn how to roll with the punches.
That is a great way to end this. Thank you so much, both of you, for coming out and being here with us. Susan, Diane Tang.